This is a Channel Africa podcast. You can also get Channel Africa on satellite PAS10, DSTV Audio Bouquet 802, and OpenView Bouquet Channel 628.
Earlier this year, we had an opportunity to witness the Human Rights Watch that had said that Ethiopia's army executed several dozens of civilians in the country's northwestern Amhara region in January. Now, calling to the United Nations to launch an independent investigation was part of the solution. We understand that the city of Mirwai in late January was among the most dangerous for civilians since the fighting began between Ethiopian federal forces and the Fano militia. We are joined on the line this evening by Tewodrose Tirfe, who is the chairman of Amhara Association in America. Good evening to you. Or perhaps good afternoon, should I be saying?
It is afternoon on this side, and good evening. Thank you for having me on your program.
Lovely. Let's just kickstart off by laying out the groundwork for what's currently taking place in the Amhara region.
Sure. In July of 2023, unexpectedly, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed Ali, dissolved the Amhara Special Forces in the region, who were primarily responsible for protecting the region and the civilians from threats that posed from the Tigray People's Liberation Front that had been at war with the central government and had also invaded the Amhara region on 4 different occasions and had conducted many hundreds really of massacres in the region, and also against threats from the Oromo Liberation Army. And so the Prime Minister dissolved the Amhara Regional Special Forces and sent in tens of thousands of soldiers into the region in addition to dissolve the Fano Freedom Fighters. The Fano Freedom Fighters and the Amhara Special Forces were very popular by the Amhara public, and because they were primarily really the protectors and defenders of the people. There were obviously protests that took place. Armed conflict started within the region in August of 2023. Prime Minister Abiy declared a state of emergency and shut down the internet completely. And in many parts of the Amhara region, including mobile lines and landlines, have been shut down. The entire region have been in complete darkness since August of 2023. In February, the state of emergency was prolonged for several more months, extended for several more months. There have been hundreds of massacres. You mentioned Marawi, which over nearly 100 civilians were killed by the soldiers going house to house. There have been, our organization has documented over 40 drone attacks, and most of them against civilians and civilian infrastructure. In one instance, a family in Wollo was returning from a baptism, and the van or the bus that was carrying this family was struck. And, basically mothers and children and entire family members that were returning from a baptismal ceremony were wiped out. And so hundreds of civilians have died from these drone attacks. And then recently, the TPLF has re-invaded the Amhara region in an area called Raya. Nearly 100,000 Amharas have been ethnically cleansed. There have been, targeted killings against civilians. And then yesterday, the TPLF also invaded another part of the Amhara region called Adarkai Wareda, where 16 civilians were killed, and including children, and about 17 civilians that were abducted. And homes were burnt in that area also as well. So essentially the Amhara people feel under siege right now by multiple forces, and it is a very dire situation. One thing that people are unaware right now is that over 4 million Amhara children are out of school, and because of the war, and over 1,000 hospitals, health centers have been damaged or have been completely destroyed as a result of the war. And so this is a humanitarian crisis that rarely gets covered by the international press. But as a result of this war, the Amhara people are suffering, and really the country is facing a political crisis.
Tewodrose, let's talk about the role then of the Amhara Association of America. What is it? What is it that you do, and especially in relation to this conflict that's happening right now? Where is your role, and where are your jurisdictions?
Sure. We are a nonprofit organization that is headquartered here in the United States. We also have members in Canada as well. What the Amhara Association of America does is we have investigators in Ethiopia, human rights investigators that investigate, document, and report on human rights atrocities or human rights violations in general. And we take these reports and we provide these reports to the public. We provide a special reports to foreign journalists who cover Ethiopia, to think tanks, to members of Congress, members of Parliament. We we use that as a way to engage policymakers. This coming Friday, I and a group of Amharas will be meeting with Ambassador Masinga, who's the U.S. ambassador to Ethiopia. We also engage international institutions such as the African Union, the United Nations, about doing the 79th session of the African Commission on Humans and People's Rights. Our members intervened in 2 separate panels. We have also a case pending before the African Commission on Human and People's Rights with regards to the genocidal acts committed against the Amhara people within the Oromia region. So we advocate on behalf of the Amhara people through international institutions, the U.S. government, engage human rights organizations, and also we engage foreign press as well. So our members are readily appear on foreign media and quoted in foreign media as well.
Now, Mr. Tirfe, I think what would be interesting to find out, I suppose not even interesting, important for this conversation is the history between Tigray and Amhara. And I say this because when you look at the conflict from face value, it seems to be a debate or perhaps conflict concerning the occupation of land. But you spoke about ethnic cleansing, so surely there is a story to be told. Can we date back to when this started, this conflict between the 2 regions?
The Amhara people and Tigray people share a common history in Ethiopia, culturally, linguistically, religiously, very, very close. And there really was no issue between the 2 peoples just because we're very close in many ways. The problem started with when the Tigray People's Liberation Front was created. And part of the goal and purpose of the TPLF, or Tigray People's Liberation Front, was to secede from Ethiopia. And in order to accomplish their political objective, they had to create a boogeyman, and the boogeyman that they created was the Amhara people. But eventually, after the civil war started in Ethiopia in the 60s, and after basically 30 years of civil war, essentially, the TPLF came into power in Ethiopia in the early 90s. When they came into power, what they did was they instituted an ethnic-based system in the country, what we call really an ethnic apartheid system. They imposed this ethnic system onto the country, dividing the country along ethnic and linguistic lines. Now, mind you, really there's no region in Ethiopia that is homogeneous, right? The people are, it's a multi-ethnic country. Over 80 languages are spoken in the country. This started to create ethnic issues because there were ethnic boundaries that had never existed before that was imposed on the people. So my family comes from an area called Wolgait, and the TPLF forcefully annexed the area of Wolgait into the Tigray region. And when they did so, they started to ethnically cleanse Amharas from that area because they wanted to change the demographics of that area. And in addition to that, they also forcefully annexed an area called Raya into the Tigray region as well, and subjugating the Amhara natives in that area. And so this is part of the issue that this caused really conflict between really the TPLF and the Amhara people. But in addition to that, similar conflicts arose in other parts of Ethiopia because what happened was that there were, obviously people who have existed there for hundreds or thousands of years now being put into different ethnic regions, and they had a different perspective. They were not given. Their views was not taken into consideration. This was not democratically done. And so this really created ethnic tensions within the country. And so for Amharas, if they live outside of their so-called ethnic region, they were designated an ethnic homeland, right, when TPLF came into power. For those Amharas who live outside of their designated ethnic region, the Amhara region, they became second-class citizens. They even in cities where they constitute either a majority or a plurality, they cannot serve in political office, serve in the military or in the police force. So even if they are constitute a majority or a plurality, they became a political minority in those areas. So as Amharas, we have been demanding for a systematic change, within the country. Really, what is happening in Ethiopia, if someone was to closely look at the system in Ethiopia, it would not be too different from what existed in South Africa during the apartheid regime. And so you have people, Ethiopians, who live within their own country, who have become essentially stateless, who have no political rights if they live outside of their so-called designated ethnic region or ethnic homeland.
And Mr. Tirfe, just on the backdrop,
and just to bring into that, now you also have conflict that has arisen between the Afar and Somali regions over land in Ethiopia. There has, people have died, and the conflict recently started about 2 weeks ago, and so this is very, very problematic.
Sure. And just to touch base on what the Vice President of Tigray's interim administration, that is General Tadesse Worede, and he said that Tigrayan officials have agreed with the federal government to finalize plans for the return of displaced people by the 7th of June in one area and in the next, the 7th of July. Are we seeing these talks moving forward? And is this beneficial for the Amhara people?
So this is part of the issue that the Amhara people have been raising for really essentially for 1 year now. When the war started, when the TPLF started the war in November of 2020, and they invaded the Amhara region as well as the Afar regions, the Amhara region had no choice but to defend themselves. And the Amharas within the Amhara region established fanos, which is really a traditional way the Amhara people defend themselves. They, farmers, teachers, just regular civilians come together to defend themselves from a threat. And they successfully defended themselves against the TPLF and liberated, many of these areas that the TPLF had occupied either during the war of northern Ethiopia or when they were in power. So the areas of Raya, the areas of Wolkait had been liberated from the TPLF. When there was pressure put on by the international, community for a negotiated settlement into this war, the Amhara people requested and demanded to be part of that process so that it is inclusive. In fact, the Amhara people requested that all of the belligerent parties be part of the process, but instead the peace agreement was signed, or the agreement was signed between the TPLF and the federal government, excluding the Amhara people. At that time, our organization stated that this is an exclusionary process. It will not end the war. It will not bring about lasting peace if you are excluding key stakeholders from the process. And it did not end the war. The war continued, but instead of only being in one region, it is at that time the war was happening in Tigray, Amhara, and Afar regions. Now it is primarily happening in the Amhara region, and so we did not trust an agreement that that excluded the Amhara people, because in that agreement, there was discussions that we felt that this discussion should have included the Amhara people. When General Tadesse Worede is talking about having the IDPs return, this is not something that could be done unilaterally without the inclusion of the Amhara people into this discussion. And this is not something that can be done. And when the Amhara region is literally at war right now. So what they have actually done is the TPLF, with the support of Abiy Ahmed Ali, has invaded the Raya region, have displaced nearly 100,000 Amharas, have been killing Amhara leaders and civilians there, and so these are, imagine, within a matter of days, nearly 100,000 people being displaced. So this is not something that's going to bring about peace when you are literally ethnically cleansing a whole people from their lands, from their homes, from their farms, from their places of work, from their places of worship. So it is really unfortunate what the TPLF and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali have chosen to do at this time.
And you touched on it earlier that not much is being said from a media point of view. No one is making noise about this war. If we look at the role that the international media can play to be more effective in highlighting the conflict and the humanitarian impact thereof, what would you say to them in terms of what's happening on the ground and how more coverage is needed to shine light on this dire situation?
That's an excellent question, because this is a humanitarian crisis that has not been getting attention. Imagine an area, a region that has been under a complete internet shutdown since August of 2023. It's almost, we're going into a year right now. A war that has been waging for nearly a year, that started in July of 2023. What I implore the foreign media is to engage with the Amhara community. There are many Amhara organizations such as ours that have been documenting and reporting on human rights violations against the Amhara people by the government. Tens of thousands of Amharas have been arrested and put into, obviously, actually, the number is close to now 12 to 15,000, and put into what amounts to a concentration camp, and many have been dying from communicable disease and torture. Political activists, reporters, have been jailed. Prominent Amhara journalists in jail. And so what I would ask them is, there's an important story here to tell, and they should engage the Amhara community so they can bring attention to what's happening to a very large community in Ethiopia. And it's critically important because Ethiopia is a country of nearly 115 million people. There's a war raging on in the neighboring Sudan. And so if Ethiopia becomes a failed state, you're talking about an area that will not just only affect the Horn of Africa, but will affect all of Africa and possibly the Middle East as well. So this is really an important story that should be told, and if the story can be told, then we can put on political pressure on Abiy Ahmed Ali to remove his forces from the Amhara region, so the people can begin to recover and have peace. Because right now he's sending tens of thousands of new soldiers into the region, new soldiers that have been trained to try to subjugate the people.
That is the voice of the chairman of Amhara Association in America, Tewodrose Tirfe.
That podcast was courtesy of Channel Africa, the African perspective.